Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this afternoon, especially on a Friday. My name is Douglas Brown, CEO at Halo Consulting, a certified minority-owned search firm based in Chicago that provides a variety of custom, scalable, talent-driven solutions for organizations in growth mode. Halo hosts virtual roundtable events like this one for HR and technology leaders on a variety of topics, and we hope you'll be interested in attending our future events. This event is being recorded, and feel free to drop any questions into the QA function in the toolbar, and we'll address those questions at the end of the webinar. We will be sharing a survey to gather your feedback, and we will have a recorded version available on YouTube as well. For now, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So we have Dr. Marlon Moore, president of Marlon Moore Consulting, LLC. His mission is to change the world with practical, leading-edge solutions that foster innovative and equitable cultures, empower diverse talent, and elevate exclusivity through leadership. Dr. Moore assists organizations and diversity professionals with strategic objectives designed to create more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces, communities, and societies. Marlon is a nationally recognized diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. Dr. Moore has trained thousands of business professionals on the principles of DEI throughout New York, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Ohio. He has authored several articles for Savory and Kaleidoscope magazines and received recognition from Black Enterprise Magazine, National Diversity Council, Disability Equity Index, Forbes, and Fortune 100. He is also the author of Diversity Starts With You, a strategy development guide for DEI. Marlon earned a bachelor's in psychology from Virginia State University, a master's in diversity management from Cleveland State University, and a doctor of philosophy in organizational leadership from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Next, we have Rocki Howard. Acknowledged as one of the top 100 minority executives 2 years in a row. Rocki Howard is the Chief Diversity Officer for Smart Recruiters. She is the host of Grown Woman Life podcast, creator of the Grown Woman Life Power Players, and a tenured talent acquisition strategist. With a background in recruitment and talent acquisition leadership and lean project management and HR certifications, her 20-plus year career spans over diverse industries, including banking, retail, manufacturing, distribution, pharmaceutical, and insurance. With several obstacles in her way, Rocki climbed her way from entry level to an executive leadership role. She is a proud over 40 Black Christian wife and mom who prioritizes being a voice for the underrepresented. She is on a mission to help her customers disrupt the intersection of diversity and recruitment and create systems that lead to simple, substantive, sincere, and sustainable diversity solutions. She believes if we change the lives of the underrepresented, we change the world. Next, we have Kenya Burrell-VanWormer. Kenya Burrell-VanWormer serves as the Senior Vice President and Executive Director of the Real Estate Apprentice Foundation for T360. She leads T360's diversity solutions consulting practice and brings 20 years of industry experience in real estate and marketing, working with leading companies across the field. In addition to her track record of successfully engaging with clients, negotiating terms, and building new business opportunities in a competitive and rapidly changing markets, Kenya also leads several of T360's diversity initiatives. Last, we have Michael J. Garner, the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Metropolitan Transportation Authority for the state of New York. Since arriving at MTA in 2009, he's been a champion in the diversity market, making it his personal and professional mission to create a more diverse and inclusive industry. Leading programs at 3 government organizations, including the New York Housing Authority, the New York City School Construction Authority, and now MTA. Mr. Garner and his teams have been responsible for more than $12 billion in contracts and payments to New York City, as well as the state of New York, and certified minority and women-owned business enterprises. In addition, Michael Garner has designed the country's leading minority and women-owned business enterprise and disadvantaged business enterprise business development programs based on dollars paid. As the architect of MTA's construction small business mentoring program, Mr. Garner has transformed the largest transportation system in North America with a results-driven construction and business development mentoring program. To date, The programs have awarded 455 contracts, totaling $488.5 million to the program participants. Out of MTA's 70,000 plus employees, under Mr. Garner's leadership, ethnic, minority, and women hiring has increased by 20%. So let's go ahead and kick it off with our first question. Marlon, I'll go ahead and throw it over to you. Give me 1 second. All right, so the first question, with the recent 50% increase of chief diversity officer roles, is this a part of the performative piece?
So thank you, Doug, for the invitation to be here. I'm pleased to be assembled with this phenomenal panel today. And thank you for all those who have joined on this Friday. You know, I think that we are in a very interesting time period. One, because we as D&I practitioners and just overall individuals in society, we have an opportunity to change the narrative and create a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable society. While I'm very appreciative of the willingness of companies to hire new chief diversity officers and put people in roles that can lead these type of strategic imperatives, I think it's really important that we start with the why. Is the why for this work the recent killing of George Floyd, Tamir Rice, the social unrest, or is the why because we fundamentally believe as a society that there's inequities that still exist in minority business ownership, the workforce, corporate boards, and if we want to fundamentally see those things change, then I'm all for it. Great, let's hire as many chief diversity officers as we can, but let's not put the sole responsibility on those leaders to change the narrative. So I think it's a real opportunity, but the more we can identify with what intrinsically motivates us to do the work, I think the better off we'll be long-term.
Great, thanks, Marlon. Rocki, any thoughts?
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I think because I am one of those new generation chief diversity officers that was hired during this time. And I absolutely agree with Marlon. The roles that were created during this time. And I think that's because there are some companies that quite frankly did it as a performative PR measure. I think that there are some companies who did it because they thought it was the right thing to do, but they weren't really ready for what that meant and didn't understand what that meant. And then there are the companies who did it because there is truly an appetite for change that's aligned with the long-term strategic vision of not only the culture of the company, but the business of the company. And I think those are the places where we will see success. I think the places where we'll see success is when those CDOs have a direct line or directly report to the CEO. And they are empowered to actually drive change within those organizations. But quite frankly, those are all the same questions that I asked prior to accepting that role. And if I hadn't felt that way, I certainly wouldn't have taken the role because I do believe that a lot of it is performative at this time.
Great, thanks, Rocki. Kenya, do you mind picking this up?
Absolutely. I agree with Marlon and with Rocki. You know, you start with the why. What is the motivation behind adding these new positions? But I do think that major companies and different industries are finally realizing this is not just a moment, this is a movement. And I do agree that as long as it is not performative and there's actually action behind those words, then yes, that's a step in the right direction. We've all seen reports. I believe McKinsey has one that shows that diversity in the workplace increases the bottom line. And I'm embarrassed to say that I've had conversations within the real estate industry with companies who have said, if it does not affect my bottom line and does not increase my bottom line, not too sure of how much we should invest in diversity. So I think that companies making a move is a strong statement and a step in the right direction. And there's still a lot of conversations that we need to have in order to change the mindset. of why this is important.
Great, thanks, Kenya. Michael, do you mind closing out this question for us?
Yes, it's a great question, and thank you once again for having me. And I agree with all of my panelists that this should not be a reactive strategy. It has to be inclusive. So, for example, here in the city of New York, that I'm in the Fortune 500 capital of the world, where there's billions of dollars of transactions taking place every day. But if I was to get in my car and drive up Madison Avenue through Harlem and drive over to the 138th Street Bridge, I'm in the Bronx, the South Bronx. The Bronx is the third poorest county in the country. How is that possible with Manhattan being the Fortune 500 capital of the world and the Bronx is the third poorest county in the country? And so in this historic time frame that we live in right now, yes, there are a lot of corporations and government organizations and agencies hiring chief diversity and inclusion officers. The question I have to ask, is it reactionary? And when you are hiring these capable individuals, are you giving them the reporting structure, staff, and resources to effectively drive the organization's mission towards diversity? If it's reactionary, no. If it's proactive, yes. And let's take advantage of the time that we live in right now with a health pandemic, which has led to an economic meltdown, because when the country is in a recession, Black America and Brown America, we're in a depression. And then you have both international and national civil rights protests and unrest. Let's take advantage of this time. As Kenya indicated, that we are not in a movement, but we are creating a movement to drive effective and efficient change.
Thanks, Michael. We appreciate your insight. Let's look at our next question. Why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important to your organization, and why is it important to you? Kenya, let's kick it off with you this time.
Sure. Well, it's important to me personally and professionally. I mean, as a woman of color, as a Black woman of color, my perception of life is different than someone who may not be a person of color. You know, what's interesting is I think that we are in a reawakening in this country of really reevaluating a lot of things, not just because of the pandemic, but because of the racial and social injustices, right? I think taking time to understand the importance of diversity right now is not only paramount to me personally, but in the real estate industry, one that you can think of, everyone needs a home, everyone needs shelter, whether it's leasing or residential or commercial. The reason it's important to our industry to embrace diversity is because not only are the practitioners diverse, but the consumers we serve are as well. You know, we've had some systemic racism that's affected the generational wealth gap for people of color in this country. There's tons of examples that we can discuss with how systemic racism has affected home ownership. We can look at, Michael, in your backyard, Levittown, right? That was a community that was created after the war for select veterans, for individuals who were not people of color. The federal government had a piece in making sure that people of color were kept out of that community. So I'm saying all this to say that there are still repercussions that are being felt in communities of color because of redlining, because of covenants. So yes, there's a lot of work to be done. And I believe that advocacy and education are the keys for us to make changes that will impact the systemic racism that's still being felt throughout our communities. So yes, it's a priority to me personally because I live this every day. I don't have the luxury, like Rocki doesn't have the luxury of turning it on and turning it off. It may be in fashion today, but it's been in fashion since I've been alive, and for most of us. So it's just a heightened awareness right now, I think, that we have in our culture. And I do think the good that's come out of this is that we're having the conversations that we've never had before. You know, it's always been taboo to talk about certain things. You know, there are things that we talk about at home with our families, but we don't talk about them outside of the home. And I do think that we are in a position now to help this next generation understand that they are in power to speak their truth and to have a voice and to be part of the change that we need in this country.
Thank you, Kenya. Any of our other panelists want to dive into this question?
from our perspective, I'm sorry, Rocki, go ahead.
No, Michael, you go ahead. I'm here.
Okay. From our perspective of working for the largest transportation network in North America with 70,000 employees with a $16 billion budget, we must ensure that taxpayers' monies are not only being spent in a cost-effective manner because it's taxpayers' monies, but in an inclusive manner. And when we determine that Blacks, Hispanics, or Asian Americans are not getting their fair share of contracts as government, we should understand why and implement creative measures that's going to allow us to award our contracts in an inclusive manner. We also must ensure that our 70,000 plus workforce is reflective of the 5,000 square mile region that we serve. We're government. We have to come up with solutions that's going to bring parity and inclusion to our businesses and our operations. That's why it's important to me from an occupational 9 to 5 role. But then my after 5 role, I'm the former president for 6 years of the 100 Black Men here in New York, and now I'm the chairman. So we fight and we advocate for those adverse conditions that Blacks in the city of New York are facing to come up with solutions that's going to allow us as a people to overcome those adverse conditions.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think for me, the personal why is really simple. You may look at me and you see a Black woman. There's multiple dimensions of my diversity, and it shouldn't be so doggone hard to show up in the world and be yourself and be able to make progress based on that. I am married to a Black man. I am raising Black daughters that belong to multiple communities, including the LGBTQ community. I'm raising a Black son that walks in the world with dreadlocks and loves a good hoodie. And I don't want to be scared every time he walks out the door as to whether he's going to come home or not. I don't want to have to worry about my daughters walking into corporate America with their natural hair and not being treated equitably. I don't want to have to worry about whether they're going to get paid at the same rate that their counterparts are going to. And this is not, I think, one of the things that I am so frustrated with from a personal perspective is because the movement was amplified on the death of George Floyd, a lot of times we want to minimize this issue to Black race. But here's some numbers to think about. Last year, and Michael talked about the fact that brown communities, Black and brown communities are in a depression. Last year, veterans were unemployed at a rate of 11.7%. People with disabilities, 12.6%. Asian workers, 13.8%. Latinx workers, 14.5%, Black workers, 15.4%, as compared to the 7.3% unemployment rate for white workers. There is a significant disparity in what happens when we show up in the world. From a company perspective, we are an applicant tracking system. We work and we want to use our power and privilege in that industry to shift this conversation around diversity hiring to actual action and getting people to actually make progress. And we recognize that we're in a unique position to be able to do that. And so that's why it's important for me personally, and that's why it's important for us professionally.
I like that. Thanks, Rocki. That really resonates. Marlon, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, just really quick. I'm reminded that in the late 1800s, Abraham Lincoln had a conversation with Frederick Douglass about Blacks going back home. And then I'm reminded just last week in Georgia, there's conversation about voting rights. So the fact that we are still having these conversations, these many decades and generations later, has just inspired me to give the rest of my life to ensure that ethnic minorities and women and other dimensions of diversity have an opportunity to truly live an equal life. You know, I understand the business case. We all get that. That's important. But someone has to be the voice. Someone has to be the conscience of these organizations, these institutions that can make it, you know, a better generation for our kids and our grandkids and our nieces and nephews. And so it's become personal for me, which is why I've started a company to do that. Because, you know, in my former employer, we had 16,000 employees. It was great, wonderful opportunity. But I thought, how impactful would it be if I could work with hundreds of companies versus just one? And so this has become my life's mission, to see that every single one of us, whether Black, white, Native American, transgender, or otherwise, has an opportunity to maximize their full potential.
And Doug, I mean, Marlon brings up a great point. As a Black person in America, we all feel frustrated. We've been here since 1619. This country was created because of the rebellion of the British tea tax. Second person who was killed in the first uprising was a Black man. And we've been mired in slavery and discrimination since 1619 to 1865. And then we had a little window of opportunity called Reconstruction, in which we prospered. And then there was a pushback where the federal troops were removed from the South, and we had the emergence of the Klan and other hate groups. And then we talk about the election of the first Black mayor in the city of New York, David Dinkins. And then he lost the election 4 years later to Rudy Giuliani. Pushback. And then we talk about the first Black president in the history of this nation for 8 years. And then what happened? Donald Trump. Pushback. And so we have a history in this country of Black prosperity for a short period of time. And then there's pushback. And so you talked about George Floyd a few minutes ago, and I'm part of the Eric Garner family. And so Eric Garner was killed in 2014. And it took our family 5 years to get some sense of justice with having that officer fired and lost his pension. And he sued the city of New York trying to get his job and pension back, and he lost last week. But if the George Floyd incident taught us anything, it taught us that when someone is killed, I don't care if it's a law enforcement officer, that they should be prosecuted and jailed. And that if we didn't learn anything else, that the leadership in Minnesota fired those officers, arrested those officers, and now they're being prosecuted. And so that's the lesson learned from the Eric Garner in 2014 to George Floyd in 2020. And so we as Black people, we need to get to a point and place in this country that we should be able to benefit from all the resources and opportunities that any other group in this country will in fact benefit from. And just the sickening attacks on Asian Americans in the city of New York that we're experiencing right now is just sick. And we all need to root out this kind of conduct in this country that we live in.
If I may echo what Michael has just said, my heart goes out to you with your family. I didn't realize the connection there, and I'm so sorry you've had to experience that. I do think, if nothing else, George Floyd has also brought us closer together as people of color, you know, that we stand in solidarity. What affects one group affects the other. And I do think that it's white supremacy that has kept us apart over these years. And Doug, I don't know if you'd like to get into this conversation, but that myth of the model minority, all of the things that have been bridged to keep us apart, when in all sincerity, our journeys and our struggles are pretty similar. So I think, again, if we look at anything good that's come out of this, I think it makes us stronger, knowing that we should stand in solidarity with each other.
Well, it's true. And Michael, I want to say the same thing. I extend my deepest condolences to what happened in your family. And I will tell you, quite frankly, when we saw the amplification of all of this on the death of George Floyd, I've got to be really honest. My first reaction was to be angry. And the reason I was angry is because that was by far not the first time we had seen that in communities of color. And I was angry because to me at the time, it felt like people were at home with COVID and had nothing better to do, and they were going to jump on a bandwagon, and I felt like it was going to be a second in time, just like every other one of these issues has been. And what I'm really excited about now, Michael, to your point, is that we have learned lessons as we've gone away, as we've come along. There was a stat by Just Capital that 89% of Americans of all colors and all races believe 2020 was that moment in time for us to rethink capitalism and rethink how businesses do business, to take care more of people in their communities and the people that work for them, et cetera. So what I was happy with is that this wasn't a moment, it was a movement. But Marlon said something that I think is really critical that we all continue to understand. There's a mindset that's still prevalent. And one of the reasons all of our work is so exhausting is because we're trying to move hearts and minds and change perspectives and challenge long held values with people, that it's different than any other value proposition. Marlon talked about the conversation between Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass that happened how many hundreds of years ago, talking about Black people going back home. And one of the catalyst for all of the Asian attacks on the attacks on Asian Americans right now is, why don't you go back where you came from, where this coronavirus started? The fundamental biases that creates this problem, which permeates in society and within our companies, we've got to be able to address that.
Exactly.
You bring up so many great points. What's interesting to me is I think that this all starts with a look in the mirror and recognizing, one, that we do have bias. We do. We all look at life a little bit differently based on our experiences. But I do think that those that have privilege are in a position now to recognize that some of their success is because of that privilege, right? The privilege of walking into a store and not being followed, the privilege to having an opportunity within an organization and not be qualified for it. So I think a lot of things are on the table now as a result of what's happened. It's unfortunate that it took his death for us to start looking at things a little bit differently and being more critical. But I do think the good are the conversations that we're having. And to your point, Rocki, we're changing hearts, we're changing mindsets, we're changing the way that people have been raised to see race and to understand and appreciate the diversity in thought, the diversity in perspective. So this didn't happen overnight. It's not going to change overnight, but we are headed in the right direction.
You know, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to bring up a point. Marlon brought up Abraham Lincoln. And I grew up in Chicago, so I have the opportunity to fly back. And I get in my car sometime and I drive around the South Side in my old neighborhood to see how things have changed. And I'm driving on the South Side one day and I see this like a monument. And then there was a house and it was gated up. So I got out and I see the name Stephen Douglas. And so Stephen Douglas, I guess, was a senator back in the 1870s and 1880s, and there was a series of debates with Abraham Lincoln. They were called the Douglas-Lincoln debates. Douglas was pro-slavery. Abraham Lincoln was anti-slavery. And Stephen Douglas is buried on the South Side of Chicago in an all-Black neighborhood. And I said to myself, how ironic is this? You know, how ironic. So things do change.
Thanks, everyone. Let's move on to our next question. I'm going to start with you, Rocki. What actions have you involved your recruiting initiatives to account for increased representation?
Yeah. So part of my role is to work with our over 4,000 clients to help them achieve their diversity hiring outcomes. So I have just spent the last 4 months creating a diversity hiring toolkit. And back to the commitment that we are making as an organization, Smart Recruiters is putting this toolkit out for use for any company for free. I'll pop the link in there, because we're tired of hearing the excuse of people saying, I don't know what to do, right? Like, I don't know how to improve it. So we're going to take that excuse away, right? And so we have developed a maturity model that says, okay, these are the 4 stages that companies go through for being a diversity talent aware to being a real diversity talent ally, which means they're getting to that point where they're hiring diverse talent on demand within their organization, right? What comes along with that is we've created a maturity model for what that looks like that are based on 4 key pillars, 12 standards. We believe if you really want to hire diverse talent, there's 4 things, big picture, you have to get right. Your diversity brand equity has to be in order. You have to be able to source strategically. You have to have fair hiring processes. And most importantly, you have to have organizational support. I believe that that's the foundation that it all sits on. And so we've provided this toolkit, this assessment. You can go in and take this very detailed assessment. And what you will get as an output is literally not only an assessment on where your organization is in terms of diversity hiring, but specific actions that you can take today in your organization to drive forward diversity recruitment. And if you look at this, I mean, this assessment you get back is about a 20-page report. If you paid a McKinsey or a Deloitte or someone like that, it probably cost you 20, 25 grand easily. But it helps people actually say, I can stop talking about this and now I know what to do. So we've rolled this out to the public and we are holding ourselves accountable for those same actions within our organization. And we're being really transparent about it. We took our own survey. I wrote it. We believe that these are the standards and our own organization is at a level 2. Now, to give you some perspective, we've had almost 300 companies take this assessment, and 70% of companies are between a level 1 and a level 2. It tells you how much work we have to do, but we're really being proactive, not only within our own organization, but helping other organizations really move the needle. Stop talking about I couldn't find it. There's no talent out there. Just cut that out. That's chaos and foolishness. And if you don't know how to get there, we'll show you how to get there.
Great, thanks, Rocki. And Rocki, if you want to throw the link into the assessment in the chat, I think everyone would be beneficial for everyone.
Certainly will.
Yeah, Doug, where's the reaction button on the screen? I was trying to find the clap button, but I guess I'll just have to do it. It's a great assessment, and I think I highly encourage those in the talent acquisition space to really check it out. So great job, Rocki.
Thanks, Marlon.
And Doug, I mean, Rocki is absolutely correct because living in the most diverse city in the world, I have zero tolerance for sitting in a corporate boardroom with leaders of this organization when I hear someone say that we can't find them. And so we've started influencing our HR, our recruitment by coming up with effective strategies to align ourselves with those ethnic organizations like the NAACP, the Urban League, the National Action Network, and other organizations, and posting our positions and making sure that the panels that we assemble are diverse panels that will conduct the interviews. And so we've seen a spike in the number of Black, Hispanic, and Asian employees being hired.
Yeah, it's one of the key things in our toolkit is to say your hiring team has to be diverse if you expect to be able to see diversity come out at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah, much agreed, Michael.
Kenya, any context to add?
Sure. What's interesting is within the industry of real estate, we have the National Association of Realtors, and the organization is 1.2 million members strong. So it's, I think, the largest trade association in the country. So when we talk about initiatives, I believe the National Association of Realtors, NAR, has done a great job of making sure that diversity is top of mind and aware, and that's through education and through advocacy, ensuring that practitioners around the country understand that redlining and covenants have prevented individuals from living in areas. The effects of that systemic racism is still in communities today. What's great is they're providing resources. To Rocki's point, people say, I don't know what to do. I want to do something. So the association stepped in and said, here are some tools. Here's an assessment that you can take to test your bias. Again, we all have it. It's making yourself aware of those biases that you use, right? We have something called certifications that you can take in the real estate industry. And so we've offered classes at Home with Diversity to better educate practitioners on following fair housing guidelines, for understanding that diversity and inclusion are part of what makes fair housing, successful, and ensuring that fair housing guidelines are followed every day, not just in April in celebration of Fair Housing Month. So it's quite a bit involved, because when you look at real estate, there's got, aspects of governmental involvement, there's local, city, and state, and it's really breaking down barriers for individuals to get into homes. So I do think that as an industry, we've done a great job of bringing awareness, finding solutions, and holding each other accountable for doing the right thing.
Great, thanks, Kenya. And it looks like we'll have time for one more question before we jump into our Q&A. How do you gather buy-in and allyship from your executive team to address DEI initiatives? I'd love for each of you to provide some insight, and you feel free to take a minute or two.
Go ahead, Michael.
No, Marlon, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Thank you kindly. So just really quick, I don't think the business case can be understated. I mean, at the end of the day, most organizations are either committed to a mission or margins. And most executives think of most things from a mission perspective, but largely in part margins. So I think it's important to identify the true business case for doing this work. So for example, Michael talked a lot about the supplier diversity work he does. If 16 or if a particular group has $1.6 trillion in purchasing power, that's a potential consumer base. And if your organization cannot demonstrate that you have a commitment to that community, then they should take their dollars elsewhere. And now we have to live that, okay? Our diverse communities, we just give our money away. But if we held that tight to us based on the commitment to us in our communities, we would make a difference. And so you have the representation, of course, you have the economic impact, and you have to speak on terms of where the executives are. And so I'd start with the business case, then I'd move to the mission and being the conscious of the company. But I'm just gonna keep it real. Sometimes you gotta get them where the getting's good.
Oh, can I just say, Michael, I know you're online, but when you talk about getting where the getting is good, here's the thing. I see every business problem that's really been actually solved, tied to performance metrics and bonus payout. It's real simple. So yes, we can talk about mission, and I would hope that our executives are aligned with a mission that is, quite frankly, shouldn't have to be a mission. It should be just do the right thing, right? But we know that that's not happening. But quite frankly, when you talk about organizational support, yes, it is nice to kind of bring people along on the journey, but sometimes you have to expedite that journey. And that journey can certainly be expedited at all levels of leadership if it's part of your performance goals and expectations and part of your bonus payout.
And Rocki, that's a great point. I would say this, and I'm gonna give you a real true example. If The football coach at Notre Dame University was hired. He's hired with an expectation to come in with a Rolodex that allows him to recruit the best student athletes that's going to allow Notre Dame University to compete for national championships and conference championships. If that football coach does not win in 2 years, what happens?
Fired.
Fired. So your point with linking diversity to compensation should be ingrained into the organization. I was in the Bronx one day, and I went to see a relative in one of the worst housing projects in the Bronx. And I turned around and I saw Jim Boeheim, who was the head basketball coach at Syracuse University. Guess where he was? In that place, recruiting a star basketball player, because his job will be on the line if he doesn't recruit the best student athletes to come in and compete. Third and final, I've worked for 6 CEOs here. And one of the CEOs I worked for was a guy by the name of Jay Walden. He was a superstar transportation expert. He is responsible for our express bus lanes and our countdown clocks, because normally we would go to the end of the platform and do this and look to see when the next train is coming. So we have these new countdown clocks now. And so when he was leaving, he said, you and I have done a great job here. He says, I've hired the most diverse senior staff of any other CEO in history of this organization. And the reason why I did it was because I wanted to show that it can be done. And it's the best thing that we could have ever done. It's the right thing to do. Don't let anybody turn back the hands of time when I leave here. And that stuck with me. Doing it because it's the right thing to do, and showing it by example and leadership that it can be done.
Great, thanks, Michael. Marlon and Kenya, anything to add?
I do appreciate what you've said, Michael, about solutions, and that's making sure that your vendors are diverse, right? When we talk about actionable items or action behind our words, it's been a year and there's still groups that are saying we've been talking about what we're going to do, but we haven't done anything yet. I think that's critical, is showing that not only is your concern internal, but let's look externally on what we can do to increase diversity. So I like that, because I think that's something that people forget about. That's as effective as making changes in the workplace. And I think it was Marlon who may have said earlier, make sure that the changes you're making are in that boardroom, right? We can make changes at levels where there's no authority, right? But I think that the boardroom is a place to start, and we're starting to see some changes, but we haven't seen enough yet.
Great, thanks, Kenya. We're now going to transition to our Q&A portion of the event. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we have time for. It looks like we did have one question come in, and I'll open it up to the panelists. When company culture has not been addressed, it can create a revolving door of talent despite targeted recruitment strategies. What strategies are your industries or organizations focused on addressing company culture?
I think that's actually a very good call out. I believe diversity cannot exist in a vacuum of equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? And so I think what you have to do, like one of the things that I am very leery about is saying, do this, do this, do this, do this. Here's your checklist. If you go do this, your environment will be inclusive. That does not work, right? I think you have to look at how have you even defined diversity in your organization? What is your culture? What are your mission and values? How does this align to your mission and values? And then what I believe you have to do is, none of us here own diversity within our organizations. I think Michael or Marlon mentioned it earlier. We can't own it, right? Diversity is owned by every person within the organization. But here's the problem. Just like anything else that you give an individual, if I give you a gift and
Rocki, I think we lost you.
use it, it may break, right? And so I think part of that, part of the expectation is that we have to determine what that means within our culture. Then we have to get our leaders bought in and our leaders set up and trained. And then we have to explain to people ongoingly, not some performative annual, here's the harassment training, but on an ongoing basis, we have to train every member of our organizations what's their role in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Because the problems happen, not all, there's this huge disconnect, I believe, from what happens above the glass ceiling to what happens below. People above the glass ceiling have these great intentions, but they're not translated and they're not held accountable below. And that's where the problems come in. The problems come in if, you know, everyone from the receptionist to the CEO is not on the same page. So I think my first recommendation would be assess what it means in your organization, set the cultural expectations for what it means, and then drive that expectation setting at every level of the organization. And don't be afraid to hold people accountable.
Yeah, Doug, I would say I think a good resource is is establishing affinity groups. Some folks call them business resource groups, employee network groups. I've seen them change an organizational culture. At my former employer, we instituted meditation and prayer rooms, not because Marlon Moore was such a genius, but because our Asian BRG brought that to the table. We also implemented military deployment benefits or revised them, not because I was so thoughtful, but because our military BRG was. So if you give your employee network groups the resources and the power to make change, and you measure that over time, you will see success. You know, I have the privilege of being a part of an experience where in our engagement score, the 3 top words used to describe our organization was diverse, welcoming, and inclusive. And as much as I wish I could take the credit, because I can't. You know, it was everybody to the point that was just made, and it was measured over time. So I say, get your affinity groups, you're up and running, give them the resources and get out the way.
I agree with Marlon. I believe that having affinity groups gives a voice to the individuals who want to be able to be heard, right? So the affinity groups are great because someone can find a fit, whether it's gender, race, hobby related. It's culture so important with transformational leadership that if you don't create that culture of inclusion, it's not going to move forward. But I do think that understanding how important culture is starts at the top. So you have to have the right leaders that understand and have the mindset of change, right, for this transformational growth. So I think you're spot on, Marlon, with those recommendations and helping to drive that change.
And Kenya, that's a great point, and Marlon, fantastic point, and Rocki also, because when you have affinity groups, senior leadership, executive leadership has to have the ability to listen and empower their diversity team in order to institute effective change.
Great, thanks everyone. We had another question come in. Is hiring a DEI leader the right first step for a company that's never made hiring a diverse workforce a priority? If not, what is?
I have to do this. The first step is to hire Marlon Moore Consulting. But no, I'm just kidding. It was there, so I had to do it, right? You know, but I do think the hiring a DEI leader, and listen, I tell my clients, I'm here, but I should only be here for a moment. You know, I'm here to help with assessing where you are, developing a statement, developing a plan. But to keep this work, to make this work sustainable, you have to hire someone whose full-time job responsibility is to promote shared accountability internally. So I do think hiring a consultant is a good step, but the best step is to hire someone full-time to do the work.
And that's a great point. And I'm in total agreement by hiring a consultant to understand where the gaps are in the organization and come up with a blueprint. Once the DEI leader comes in, that DEI leader has to be almost like a consultant, where they will review the policies on the procurement side and on the HR and people side to make sure that there are no roadblocks or no gaps. And if they are, having the ability to eradicate those barriers to entry or gaps on the buying side and on the hiring side, coming up with strategies that's going to allow that organization to hire in an inclusive manner. And then giving the DEI person, the staff and resources to execute their mission.
And to your point about having, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Kenya.
Okay. And to your point about having a consultant in, it's someone from the outside looking in that brings a different perspective, who's not involved in the politics or understands what's going on day to day. And sometimes that's what's needed in order to help bring change. And then some of the activities that the consultant may be able to perform may go over with more confidence to employees or with the employees as opposed to someone internally. So there's so many benefits. And sometimes having the consultant does lead into a full-time position because of the demand being greater than expected.
I just want to add this. I want to take this back to where we started at the top of the hour, because I read this question and my initial reaction is, if diverse workforce has never been a priority, do you know the why of why you want to hire a DEI leader? And is that the first right next step? And so I agree with, like, hire a consultant, pull it apart, understand what that means. Then the next step really is, what are we committing to as an organization? And is a DEI leader the right hire for us? To Michael's point, are you going to give that person what they need to drive change in the organization? But if this has never been a priority, don't do the performative step of, oh, well, then of course I'm supposed to hire a CDO or a DEI leader. I think you need to do the work of understanding what that means in your organization, what that person's role is going to be, what the expectations for it is, what are the skills that you need, what are the outcomes that you need. And as I hear it, Marlon Moore Consulting could probably help you figure that out.
Thank you, Rocki. And I would be remiss too if I did not give a shout out to Halo Consulting. They can also support your needs as well. So
they can also help you hire the DEI person once you decide to hire them.
There you go. There you go.
Full circle here.
Full service panel, right? Yeah, take the assessment, buy real estate, take the train to where you need to go.
Well, everyone, thank you so much. And in closing, I want to thank everyone for joining, and a special thank you to our speakers. You can check out Halo's previous events on our YouTube channel, and we'll keep everyone updated about our future events that we'll be hosting moving forward. We do have 2 events specifically for Black professionals to gather career advice from Black executives, which we are hosting next Friday, April 9th, and the following Friday, April 16th. So feel free to join if you are available. We will be sending out surveys early next week to get your feedback as we continue to iterate for future events. So thanks everyone for joining. Have a great weekend, and hope you can attend our next event.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks,
Thank
panel.
you.
You guys
Thanks,
were great.
Doug.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.